"This soup's perfect," Mafia boss said, then pulled her from the kitchen and whispered, "Stay with me." The evening rush at Sal's Corner was over, leaving the diner in a state of weary calm. The clatter of plates had subsided to the occasional scrape of a fork, and the air, thick with garlic and oregano all day, now held the softer, sweeter scent of simmering vegetables. Lena Alvarez leaned against the stainless steel counter of the kitchen, her eyes closed for just a moment. She was 26, but some nights she felt 40. The ache in her feet was a familiar companion, a dull throb that worked its way up her calves, a souvenir from the double shift she'd pulled again. Her life was a repeating loop of this kitchen, her tiny apartment 4 blocks away, and the suffocating weight of bills she could never quite get ahead of. Moraville was a city that chewed up people like her, people with no family, no safety net. Lena's only defense was her quietness. She kept her head down, her voice low, and her interactions brief. She was the ghost of Sal's Corner, floating between the sizzling grill and the stock pots, efficient, respectful, and invisible. But she wasn't invisible in her cooking. She picked up a wooden spoon and turned the large pot on the back burner. Tonight's minestrone. She'd spent an hour that afternoon dicing the celery, carrots, and onions, sautéing them in good olive oil until they were soft and sweet. She'd added the tomatoes, the beans, the broth, and the herbs herself. It wasn't from a can, not like the marinara Sal bought in bulk. This was hers, her grandmother's recipe, the one good thing she'd inherited. She stirred the soup, watching the small pasta shells and dark kidney beans swirl in the rich, fragrant broth. She tasted it. It needed a little more salt, a touch more basil. She adjusted, tasted again. Perfect. It was a small, simple pride, but it was hers. It was the only part of her day that didn't feel like survival. The bell over the diner's front door jingled, a cheerful sound that was immediately contradicted by the sudden, heavy silence that fell over the dining room. Lena looked up. Peering through the rectangular pass-through window, Maria, the senior waitress, had frozen mid-step, a coffee pot held aloft in her hand. Even Sal, who rarely came out from his office, had poked his head out, his face pale. 3 men walked in. 2 were large, built like brick walls in dark, expensive-looking suits. They scanned the room, their eyes missing nothing, their faces blank and professional. They were shadows. It was the man between them who held the room captive. He was not as large as his men, but his presence filled the diner, sucking the air out of it. He wore a black suit, tailored so perfectly it seemed a part of him. His hair was dark. His face was all sharp angles and hard planes. He looked like a man who had never been surprised, a man who had never had to raise his voice. He didn't need to. This was Silvano Costa. Lena's stomach tightened. Everyone in Moraville knew that name. It was whispered, never shouted. Costa owned things, businesses, politicians, people. He was the most feared man in the city, the boss of the Costa family, the ghost who held all the strings. Lena had seen wise guys in here before, local capos taking up a back booth for a late-night meeting, but this was different. This was the king. He didn't look around. He simply walked to the quietest booth in the corner, the one with the cracked vinyl, and slid in, facing the door. His men didn't sit. One stood by the entrance. The other took a position near the kitchen, his back to the wall. Maria approached the table, her hands visibly trembling. "Mr. Costa, welcome to Sal's. Can I get you something?" His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "The soup, minestrone, and a black coffee." Maria practically ran to the kitchen pass-through. "Lena, the minestrone, table 4, now, and coffee, black." That's him, isn't it?" Lena whispered, her hands suddenly cold. "Don't look at him," Maria hissed, her eyes wide. "Just get the soup, and make it good." Lena's hands were steady as she ladled the soup into a clean white bowl. She'd made the soup 100 times. It was good. She sprinkled a tiny bit of fresh parsley on top and slid the bowl onto the pass-through. Maria snatched it and hurried away. from her sanctuary in the kitchen. Lena watched. She couldn't help it. He didn't speak to his men. He didn't look at his phone. He simply picked up the spoon. He paused, looking into the bowl for a moment, as if studying it. He dipped the spoon in, raised it, and tasted. Lena held her breath. He didn't react. No smile, no frown. He just ate, methodically, silently. He finished the entire bowl. He set the spoon down neatly beside it. Maria crept back to the table. Was everything all right, sir? Silvano Costa looked up, but not at Maria. His gaze went past her, through the pass-through, and seemed to land directly on Lena. She felt it like a physical touch, a jolt that went right through her. His voice was soft, but it carried clearly in the hushed room. "This soup's perfect." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest, sudden and unexpected. It had been weeks, maybe months, since she'd heard a compliment. Her landlord, her boss, the rude customers. Life was a steady drip of complaints and demands. This simple, two-word statement from the most dangerous man in the city landed like a bomb. "The coffee," Maria whispered, sliding the empty mug onto the counter. "He's still waiting." Maria was too shaken. Lena could see it. "I'll take it," Lena said, surprising herself. She poured the fresh coffee into a thick ceramic mug. Wiping her damp palms on her apron, she pushed through the swinging door. The diner felt different from this side. The air was colder. She walked to the table. One of the bodyguards shifted, his eyes tracking her hands. She kept her gaze on the mug. She set it down gently on the table. "Your coffee, sir." He looked up. It was the first time she had seen his eyes up close. They were dark, darker than coffee, and they weren't cold. They were assessing, but not in the way men usually looked at her, that quick, dismissive slide up and down. He looked at her face, at her eyes, as if he were memorizing her. It lasted only 2, maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. An electric current passed between them, brief, powerful, and unsettling. She saw exhaustion in those eyes, and something else, a deep, hollowed-out grief. Lena felt her breath catch. She gave a quick, jerky nod and retreated to the safety of her kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. He left 10 minutes later. He paid at the register, leaving a crisp $50 bill on the counter for a $10 check. "For the soup," he said to Maria, and was gone. The next night, at exactly 8 o'clock, he returned. The staff tensed, but it was less of a shock this time. He slid into the same booth. One of his men nodded to Maria. The same. Soup and a coffee, and so it began. He came back the next night, and the night after that. For a week, Silvano Costa became a fixture at Sal's corner. Same time, same booth, same order. He never asked for anything else. He never spoke, other than a low thank you, when Lena, who had wordlessly taken over serving him, brought his bowl. He would eat his soup slowly, and he would watch her. It wasn't the predatory leer she got from construction workers at lunch. It wasn't the dismissive glance of the businessmen. It was a heavy, focused attention. He watched her move between the tables, her worn sneakers silent on the tiled floor. He watched her refill ketchup bottles, her movements economical and tired. He watched the way she'd push a stray strand of brown hair behind her ear, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was unnerving. Lena felt his gaze like a weight on her skin. But it was a strange weight. It didn't feel threatening. It felt present, in a life where she felt completely invisible. This man, this dangerous, powerful man, saw her. He made no demands, offered no fake smiles. He just ate and watched. The rest of her life, however, remained unchanged. The exhaustion was bone deep when she finished her shift just after midnight on Thursday. The alley behind the diner was damp and smelled of bleach and old tomatoes. She pulled her thin jacket tighter, clutching her keys in her fist, the metal biting into her palm. Her apartment building was old, the brick crumbling, the lobby light always flickering. He was waiting for her. Mr. Grabowski, her landlord, was leaning against the peeling pane of her apartment door. He was a large, soft man who always smelled of stale beer and cigarettes. Lena, running late again, he slurred, blocking her path. And the rent's running late, too. That's 3 days now. Lena kept her eyes on the lock. I get paid tomorrow. Mr. Grabowski, I told you, I'll have it in the morning. She tried to push past him, to get her key in the door. He put a fleshy hand on the wall, barring her way. Yeah, well, tomorrow's not cutting it for me. I got expenses. But he leaned in, his foul breath washing over her. We could work something else out. An arrangement. No, Lena said, her voice firm, though her stomach was churning with a familiar mix of fear and disgust. I'll have the money tomorrow. I don't think you're hearing me. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. I'm talking about other favors, a pretty girl like you. His eyes dropped to her chest, and a sick smile spread across his face. Get off me, Lena snapped, shoving him. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and grabbed her wrist, twisting it. You think you're tough? You're nothing. You're a little mouse in my building. His thumb pressed down, hard, on the delicate bones of her wrist. A white-hot spike of rage shot through Lena, eclipsing her fear. She was so tired of this, tired of him, tired of being small and scared. I said, get off me! With her free hand, she jammed her keys, sharpened out into the soft flesh of his forearm. Grabowski bellowed in pain, stumbling back, clutching his arm. You crazy! You'll pay for that! You'll be on the street by morning! Lena didn't wait. She slammed her key into the lock, her hands shaking so badly it took 2 tries. She got the door open, threw herself inside, and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt in the chain. She slid down the wood panel, her back pressed against the door, listening to him curse and kick the frame. You'll pay, Lena, you hear me? You'll pay. His footsteps finally receded down the hall. Lena stayed on the floor in the dark, her body trembling with adrenaline and fury. She looked down at her wrist. In the dim light from the street, she could already see a dark, ugly bruise forming where his thumb had been. The next day, she wore her oldest long-sleeved shirt to work, the one with the frayed cuffs. It was hot in the kitchen, and she kept having to push the sleeves up, then quickly pull them back down. At 8 o'clock, he arrived. Same booth, same quiet entrance. Lena brought him his soup. Her hand was shaking, just slightly. She set the bowl down. Thank you, he murmured, his eyes on the soup. She was serving a family at the next table, explaining the specials, when her sleeve slipped. She reached up to pour water, and the cuff slid back, revealing the dark, thumb-shaped bruise marring the pale skin of her wrist. She finished pouring and turned to leave. She felt his eyes on her. She glanced at his booth. He wasn't eating. His spoon was paused halfway to his mouth. His gaze was fixed, not on her face, but on her wrist. His eyes, usually so calm and unreadable, had narrowed to slits. A muscle in his jaw clenched, just once. It was a terrifyingly subtle change. He looked from the bruise up to her face. Lena's face burned. She yanked her sleeve down, her heart jumping into her throat, and fled to the kitchen. He knew. He'd seen it. She felt exposed, ashamed. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask what happened. He finished his soup, paid, and left. But the air he left behind felt 10 degrees colder. Lena's walk home was tense. She scanned every shadow, her keys clutched in her fist, half expecting Grabowski to jump out at her. But the street was empty. Her stoop was clear. She locked her door, checked it 3 times, and slept poorly. The next morning, she was woken by a knock. It wasn't Grabowski's heavy pounding. It was a light, rapid tap. She opened the door on the chain to see her neighbor, Mrs. Petrova, in her pink housecoat. "Lena, did you hear?" "Mrs." Petrova whispered, her eyes wide with horrified excitement. "That terrible landlord, Mr. Grabowski." Lena's blood went cold. "What about him?" "Someone found him in the alley behind the convenience store. Early this morning. Oh, it's awful." She crossed herself. They said both his arms are broken, and his legs, beaten, just terrible. The police think it was a message. Someone he owed money to, maybe. "Oh my God," Lena whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "Is he alive, Mrs.?" Petrova nodded. "But they said he won't be walking or collecting rent for a very, very long time. Good riddance, I say, but what a way to go." Lena thanked her and closed the door. She leaned against it, her stomach rolling. A dark, guilty relief washed over her, immediately followed by a wave of nausea. She thought of the cold look in Silvano Costa's eyes. She thought of him seeing her bruise. She pushed the thought away. It was impossible. A coincidence. He was a mafia boss. Not her personal bodyguard. He ate soup. He didn't break men's legs over a bruised wrist, did he? That night, Sal's corner was quiet. Lena felt like she was walking in a dream. Every time the bell jingled, she jumped. At 8 o'clock, he came. He slid into the booth. The diner felt charged, the air thick with everything unsaid. Lena's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the bowl. She set it down in front of him. He looked up at her, his face a perfect, unreadable mask. She couldn't let it go. She had to know. The fear of not knowing was worse than the fear of asking. She waited until he was finished, until the only other customers were an old couple splitting a cannoli. Maria was in the back, counting receipts. It was just Lena, Silvano, and his 2 stone-faced guards. She walked to his table, wiping her palms on her apron. "Mr. Costa." Her voice was a thread, barely audible. He looked up. The 2 bodyguards tensed, their hands moving inside their jackets. Silvano lifted one finger, a tiny, lazy motion. They settled. "My landlord," Lena whispered, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Mr. Grabowski, this morning, was it you?" A long, heavy silence stretched between them. He didn't blink, he didn't smile, didn't frown. He neither confirmed nor denied. His face gave away nothing. Then, slowly, he stood up. He was taller than she'd realized, and he loomed over her. But it wasn't an aggressive posture. It was a solid, immovable presence, like a mountain. He reached out, his movement deliberate and slow, giving her time to pull away. She stood frozen. She didn't flinch. His fingers, surprisingly warm and calloused, gently circled her bruised wrist. His thumb traced the dark, ugly mark that Grabowski had left. It was the softest, most careful touch she had felt in years, and it sent a terrifying shiver straight through her. He leaned in, his face close to hers, his dark eyes holding hers captive. His voice was so low it was just for her, a gravelly murmur that vibrated through her bones. "No one touches what's mine." He held her gaze for one more second, then let go of her wrist. He placed a $100 bill on the table, turned, and walked out of the diner. His men followed, melting into the night behind him. Lena was left standing by the empty booth, her wrist still tingling, her entire body shaking. She didn't know if she had just been claimed or if she had just been saved. In that moment, she wasn't sure there was a difference. The days that followed were a quiet, nerve-wracking study in contradiction. Lena's life was suddenly split in 2. There was the Lena who still scrubbed pots until her knuckles were raw, who still counted her tips twice, who still felt the familiar pang of anxiety when her cupboards looked bare. And then there was the Lena who Silvano Costa watched every night. His words echoed in her mind, a constant, low vibration. "No one touches what's mine." She was terrified of him. He was a man who broke other men. He was violence and shadow, a name that made police captains look the other way. He had claimed her as simply as he ordered his soup, and the implications of that claim made her skin feel cold. And yet, for the first time in her adult life. Lena walked home without her keys laced between her fingers. She didn't flinch when a car slowed down nearby. The fear that had lived in her stomach for years, the constant, grinding fear of men like Grabowski, of the dark alleys and the empty streets, had receded. It was replaced by a different kind of fear, a sharper, more focused dread of one man. But the old, dull ache, it was gone. She felt insulated, as if a bubble of invisible, dangerous glass had descended around her. She felt impossibly safe. He continued to come in at 8 o'clock. The staff at Sal's corner had moved from terror to a state of tense normalcy. Maria even started calling him our 8 o'clock, though never to his face. He sat, he ate, he watched. But now, when Lena brought his coffee, his eyes would meet hers, that brief. Electric contact was no longer accidental. It was intentional. A silent, daily acknowledgement. One night, a Tuesday. The diner was slow. A rainstorm lashed against the windows, turning Moraville into a blur of neon and water. By 10:30, the last customer had paid and run out into the downpour. Sal had already left, and Maria was in the back, mopping the floors, eager to get home. Silvano was still in his booth. He had finished his soup an hour ago, his coffee long cold. He was just sitting, watching the rain. His 2 men were by the door, impassive as statues. Lena wiped down the counter, her movements slow. She wanted to go, but she couldn't leave until he did. It was the unwritten rule. He gestured, a small movement of his hand, not at her, but at the seat opposite him. Lena froze. Maria poked her head out from the kitchen, her eyes wide, and just as quickly disappeared. Lena looked at the guards. They were looking away, pointedly studying the street. Her heart did a slow, heavy drum roll against her ribs. She was afraid to say no, and just as afraid to say yes. Slowly, she untied her apron, her hands not quite steady. She folded it and placed it on the counter. She walked over, her footsteps sounding loud in the quiet room. She slid into the vinyl booth, perching on the edge of the seat. It was the first time she had sat down all day. Up close, his face was more complex. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes. He didn't look like a monster. He looked tired. "You're a good cook, Lena," he said. His voice, without the diner's clatter, was even deeper than she'd thought. "It's just soup," she murmured, her eyes dropping to the table. She traced the wood grain pattern with her fingernail. "It's not. It's good. It reminds me of something." She dared to look at him. Of what? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, fixed on the rain-streaked glass. "My mother. She owned a restaurant a long time ago. Before everything. It was small, like this. But the food, it meant something. It wasn't just business." He looked back at her. "Your soup tastes like that, like it means something." Lena's throat felt tight. The single aching void in her life was the absence of family. His words, his vulnerability, disarmed her. "My grandmother taught me, we didn't have much. But she always said a good soup could fix anything. She'd make it on Sundays. The whole apartment building would smell like tomatoes and basil." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was a sad, crooked expression that vanished almost as soon as it appeared, but it changed his entire face, softening the hard angles. "She sounds like a smart woman." She was, Lena said, a genuine, small smile finding its way to her own face. She was tough. She didn't take nonsense from anyone. "That's a good way to be," he said. They sat in silence again, but it wasn't awkward. It was full. The rain drummed against the roof, a rhythmic, cozy sound. She could feel the warmth radiating from him across the small table. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and clean cotton. "You should get home," he said finally, his tone shifting, becoming more formal. "It's late. The rain is stopping." "Yes," she said, sliding out of the booth. "Good night, Mr. Costa." "Silvano," he corrected her, so softly she almost didn't hear it. She nodded, grabbing her jacket and her bag. "Good night, Silvano." She stepped out into the damp, clean air. The rain had slowed to a fine mist. The streetlights glittered on the wet pavement. She turned toward her apartment, her mind replaying the conversation. He had a mother. He missed her. He had a name. Silvano. He was a person, not just a shadow. She was 2 blocks from her building, walking down a narrow street lined with dark storefronts. When she heard it, footsteps, heavy, too fast, and definitely behind her. She sped up, her newfound sense of safety evaporating like a puff of smoke. The footsteps sped up. Two sets. She glanced over her shoulder. 2 men, in hoodies, their faces obscured. "Hey! Wait up!" one of them called out, his voice rough. Lena broke into a run. She fumbled in her pocket for her keys. She was still a block away. They were gaining on her. "Just want to talk," the other one yelled, laughing. She rounded the corner onto her street, and a black car, parked halfway down the block with its lights off, suddenly flashed its headlights. The men behind her skidded to a stop. The car's doors opened. 2 men got out. They weren't Silvano's usual guards. These men were even bigger. They didn't run. They just moved onto the sidewalk. creating a solid wall of dark suits between Lena and the men following her. They said nothing. They just stood there, arms crossed. The two men in hoodies froze, their bravado gone. They looked at the car, then at the two human mountains blocking their path. One of them muttered something to the other. They backed up slowly, then turned and ran, their sneakers pounding on the pavement until they were gone. Lena stood breathless, her back pressed against a brick wall, her heart hammering. One of Silvano's men, the one who had driven, got out of the car. He was older, with graying hair. He nodded at her, a simple, respectful dip of the chin. He didn't approach her. He just opened the back door of the car. She walked on, shaking legs, and got in. The man got back in the driver's seat and drove the remaining half block to her building. He pulled up to the curb. He didn't speak. He just waited for her to get out. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded again. She got out, ran up her steps, and locked her door. She watched from her window until the black car pulled slowly away. She was leaning against the sink, trying to catch her breath, when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unknown number. She never answered unknown numbers, but something made her pick it up. "Hello? Are you home safe?" The voice, deep, gravelly. "Silvano." Lena sank onto a kitchen chair. How did you get my number?" "That's not important," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a hard edge to it, an anger she hadn't heard before. "Are you locked in?" Yes, I'm safe. Your men. They were nearby. They will remain nearby. Good night, Lena." The line clicked. She stared at the phone. He had her number. He had men watching her building. The bubble of safety was real, and it was tightening. Part of her wanted to scream, to rail against this high-handed, terrifying control, but the other part of her, the part that was still shaking from the chase, was awash with a profound, guilty gratitude. Something shifted in Lena after that night. The change was small, but her colleagues noticed. "You're smiling," Maria said a few days later, as they were prepping the salad bar. "What? No, I'm not," Lena said, her face flushing. "Yes, you are. You've been lighter, and I see you talking to our 8 o'clock. Sal thinks he's going to buy the diner." "I think he's just sweet on your soup." Maria winked. "He's just a customer." "Maria," Lena said, but her denial was weak, and she knew it. She felt a strange, tentative confidence blooming in her chest. She bantered back with Sal when he complained about the cost of fresh basil. She didn't flinch when a customer sent back a steak. She felt seen, and the woman Silvano Costa saw was not someone to be trifled with. That Friday, he came in as usual. He ate his soup, drank his coffee, but when Lena came to clear his bowl, he spoke. "My grandmother's recipe," she said, surprised at the question. "It's a chicken and vegetable soup, but it's a lot of work. She only made it on Sundays." "Will you make it for me?" he asked. It wasn't a demand. It was a request, quiet and direct. "Here? Sal doesn't. It's not on the menu." "Not here," he said. "Make it here, but just for me. Whatever it costs, I'll pay." Lena looked at him. He wanted her grandmother's soup. The soup that was more memory than food. It felt like asking for a secret. "Tomorrow," she found herself saying. "I'll make it tomorrow." The next day, Saturday, Lena came in early. She'd stopped at the market on the way, buying the best chicken, the freshest dill, the brightest lemons. She spent hours in the kitchen before the dinner rush, simmering the broth, poaching the chicken, dicing the vegetables into perfect tiny squares. It smelled like her childhood. It smelled like home. When Silvano arrived at 8, she was nervous. She served the soup to him herself. It was a deep, golden broth, rich with shredded chicken, carrots, and tiny pasta stars. He looked at the bowl for a long time. He picked up his spoon. He tasted it. Lena watched from the kitchen pass through. He ate slowly, more slowly than usual. He finished the entire bowl, then sat back, his eyes closed for just a second. Lena turned back to her work, her heart feeling strangely full. A moment later, the kitchen door swung open. Lena spun around, a gasp catching in her throat. Sal was gone. Maria was in the dining room. It was just her. Silvano stood in the doorway of her kitchen, his large frame filling the space. He had never come in here. This was her sanctuary. He had crossed a line. "Mr. Costa," she said, her voice breathless. You can't be in here. Health code." He ignored her, his dark eyes fixed on her. He looked around the small, hot kitchen, at the bubbling pots, the rack of spices, the worn wooden cutting board. "This is where you make it," he said, more to himself than to her. "Yes," she whispered. He took a step toward her. She backed up, hitting the stainless steel counter. He stopped, holding his hands up slightly, as if to show he was unarmed. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request this time. "What? Where?" I'm working." "Not far." He stepped forward again, closing the distance between them. He didn't reach for her arm, not this time. Just held out his hand. She looked at his hand. It was large, calloused, the hand of a man who was capable of terrible things. It was also the hand that had touched her bruised wrist with such impossible gentleness. Her shift was over in an hour, but he wasn't asking about an hour from now. He was asking now. She wiped her palms on her apron. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. He didn't yank her. He simply turned and led her. He pulled her gently out of the kitchen through the swinging door, past a stunned-looking Maria. His guards fell in behind them. He didn't lead her out the front door, but to a side exit she'd never seen him use, a private hallway that led to the alley. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, they were plunged into the quiet of the narrow brick passage. The sounds of the diner faded. It was just the hum of a distant air conditioner and the scent of the night air. He didn't let go of her hand. He turned to face her, backing her against the rough brick wall. He was so close. She could feel the heat of his body, see the flecks of gold in his dark, intense eyes. He was overwhelming. He raised his other hand and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers grazing her temple. She shivered. "You're scared of me," he whispered. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she breathed. "Good, you should be." His gaze dropped to her mouth. "But not like this. Not with me." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. He wasn't touching her, not anywhere but her hand and the featherlight trace on her cheek. But she felt surrounded by him. He lowered his head, and she saw his eyes close. He didn't kiss her. He breathed her in, his nose brushing the side of her neck, inhaling the scent of her hair, her skin, the kitchen spices. "Basil," he murmured, his warm breath on her skin sending a jolt straight to her stomach. "And you—" He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark, heavy-lidded with an emotion she couldn't name. It was hunger, but it was also a profound, aching sadness. "I don't know what you're doing to me, Lena," he whispered, his voice rough. "I come here for soup. I tell myself it's the soup." He placed his free hand on the brick wall next to her head, caging her in. He was so close. She could do nothing but look up at him, her heart a trapped bird. "Stay with me," he said, the words a low vibration against her skin. "Not just tonight. I want you safe. I want you near. I can't," she whispered, but the protest was weak. "Yes, you can." And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was slow. Yes, but it was hungry. It was the kiss of a starving man. His lips were firm, searching, claiming hers with a desperate, pent-up force that stole her breath. There was heat, a sudden, shocking fire that arced between them. His hand left the wall and moved to her waist, his fingers gripping her, pulling her flush against his hard body. She felt the solid muscle of his chest, the buckle of his belt. For a second, all her fear dissolved, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated sensation. She tasted coffee on him, and something dark and male. Her free hand came up, her fingers gripping his suit jacket, holding on as the world tilted. She kissed him back, a small, hesitant response that made him groan deep in his chest. His hand at her waist tightened, his thumb brushing possessively over her hip bone. The kiss deepened, became less about claiming and more about knowing. He wasn't forcing her. He was asking, demanding, and taking all at once. Then, as suddenly as it began, she remembered who he was, what he was. This was a man who broke legs, a man who had men with guns. Lena tore her mouth from his, gasping, her chest heaving. She pushed against his chest. He let her go instantly, stepping back, though his eyes never left her. He was breathing heavily. His suit jacket rumpled where she'd grabbed it. She stood trembling, her back pressed to the brick, her lips tingling and swollen. She felt branded. She looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who had just kissed her, with a desperation that mirrored the secret loneliness in her own heart. She didn't know if she should run back into the diner and call the police, or if she should surrender to the heat that was still pulsing low in her stomach. She was trapped, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if the cage was his or if it was her own. "Get your things from the diner," Silvano said, his voice now calm and level, all traces of the desperate hunger gone. He had stepped back, giving her space, fixing the cuff of his shirt. "My bag, my tips," she stammered, her mind racing. "Matteo will get them," he said, nodding to one of his men who had been standing silently at the end of the alley. The man vanished back into the diner. "He'll tell Maria you had a family emergency. You can't just—" Lena started, but the protest died in her throat. He had just decided her shift was over, decided her night. "I'm not asking, Lena," he said. But his voice was not harsh. It was a statement of fact, as unchangeable as the color of his eyes. "You're not safe in that apartment. You're not safe walking home. You saw that tonight. You'll stay with me." A black sedan, different from the one that had followed her, pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was long, polished, and utterly silent, a car for funerals, or for men like him. Matteo returned, holding her worn handbag and the small canvas pouch where she kept her tips. He handed them to her with a respectful nod. Silvano opened the back door of the car. It was an invitation, but it felt like a command. Lena looked at the dark, plush interior. This was it. This was the moment she crossed a line she could never uncross. Going from the girl who served him soup to the woman who got in his car, she took a breath, the scent of basil and brick dust filling her lungs, and she got in. The car ride was silent, a blur of city lights moving past the tinted windows. She sat on her side, he on his, a 3-foot chasm of expensive leather between them. She clutched her bag in her lap, her knuckles white. She could feel his presence, a solid, contained energy. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking out the window, his jaw set, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. They left the city center, the streets growing wider, the buildings giving way to high, stone fences and wrought iron gates. They were in the old part of Morayville, the part where the original money lived, walled off from the rest of the world. The car slowed and turned toward a massive black gate. A man with a rifle, dressed in a discreet dark uniform, stepped out of a guardhouse. He saw the car and simply nodded, and the massive gates swung open silently. They drove up a long, winding driveway, past trees so old their branches drooped to the ground. Lena's apartment could have fit into the guardhouse. The house itself wasn't a modern glass box. It was a mansion. Yes, but it was old, a stone behemoth covered in ivy, with dark windows and a heavy, carved wooden door. It was beautiful, but it was intimidating. It looked like a place that held secrets. The car stopped. Silvano got out and a different man opened her door. She stepped out, her worn sneakers looking obscene on the smooth, ancient cobblestones. "Welcome home, Lena," Silvano said, his hand lightly touching the small of her back. The touch was possessive, guiding, and it sent another shiver up her spine. Inside, the house was not dark. It was warm, lit by soft lamps. The decor was classic, dark wood, rich Persian rugs, heavy brocade curtains. A massive unlit fireplace dominated the entryway, and a wide staircase swept up into the shadows. It was the house of a man much older than he was, a house inherited, not built. It was spotless, quiet, and suffocatingly large. Lena felt like a stray cat brought in from the rain, out of place and ready to bolt, but no one treated her that way. The men who moved silently through the halls, all dark suits and watchful eyes, nodded at her. They didn't leer, they didn't whisper, they looked at her, registered her, and looked away. She was with him, and so she was to be respected. "Are you hungry?" he asked, leading her through a wide archway. "No, I ate at the diner," she lied. He led her to a kitchen that was larger than the entire dining room at Sal's corner. It was a professional-grade marvel of stainless steel and copper pots, but at the center was a massive, worn wooden butcher block that looked 100 years old. An older woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled into a tight bun was wiping it down. She looked up when they entered, and her expression softened instantly when she saw Silvano. "You're late," she said, her voice thick with an Italian accent. She looked at Lena, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "And you brought a guest. Sophia, this is Lena Alvarez," Silvano said. His tone was different with the older woman, softer. "Lena, this is Sophia. She took care of my mother. Now she takes care of me." "He's a terrible eater," Sophia said, drying her hands on an apron. "He just pushes food around the plate. But you look like you need to eat. Sit." "Sophia, she's the one I told you about," Silvano said, his hand still on Lena's back. "The soup." Sophia's sharp eyes widened. She looked at Lena again, a new respect dawning. "Ah, you are the soup girl. He talks about this soup. I think he's crazy. It's just soup, but he says no." "Lena's going to be staying with us," Silvano said. "Good," Sophia nodded. "This place needs a woman. It smells like men and old money." She turned back to Lena. "He says you cook like his mother. I knew his mother. That is a big compliment. She was a saint." Thank you," Lena murmured, feeling overwhelmed. "Show her the kitchen tomorrow," Silvano said to Sophia. "She'll be cooking here." He looked at Lena. "If you want to," he turned back to Sophia. "She misses real food." Sophia cackled. "He means he misses his food. My risotto is too good for him." Lena felt a small knot of tension in her shoulders release. A kitchen. She understood kitchens. She understood cooks. Sophia was not a guard. She was a person. "I'll show her the guest wing," Silvano said. He led Lena out of the kitchen, up the sweeping staircase. The guest room was not a guest room. It was a suite, larger than her entire apartment, a 4-poster bed, a silk armchair, a fireplace, and doors that opened onto a small stone balcony. It was beautiful, antique, and utterly impersonal. "The bathroom is through there," he said, pointing. "There are clothes in the closet. They should fit, more or less. New," from Sophia. Lena looked at him, her arms wrapped around her stomach. "Silvano, You're safe here," he interrupted, his voice gentle. "That's all this is. You're safe. From those men who followed me?" His eyes hardened. "From everyone. Get some sleep." He was about to leave, but he paused in the doorway. He looked back at her, standing small and lost in the middle of the enormous, opulent room. He walked back to her. He didn't touch her. Not this time. He just looked at her, his gaze heavy. "I know this is a lot," he said. I'm not good at this, Lena. I'm good at breaking things. I don't know how to not break this. Not break." "Me?" she whispered. "Yes." He reached out, his knuckles lightly brushing her cheek. "I won't hurt you. I won't force you. You're not a toy to me. You're a choice." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It was nothing like the kiss in the alley. It was warm, firm, and chaste. A promise. "Sleep. No one will bother you." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Lena slept in his guest room. She was too emotionally overwhelmed to say yes to anything, to understand what she was feeling, but she was too scared to leave, scared of the men in the hoodies, scared of a world where she was prey. Here, in this gilded cage, she was safe, but she was still in a cage. She woke early. The sun was just a gray promise in the sky. The house was silent. She had slept in the new silk pajamas she'd found, but she hadn't slept well. She was in a Mafia boss's mansion. The reality of it was stark and cold in the morning light. She slid out of the massive bed, her bare feet sinking into the thick rug. She felt a desperate need for coffee, for something normal. She crept out of her room, down the grand staircase. The house was still, but it felt watchful. She was sure men were awake, somewhere, guarding him. She found the kitchen. It was empty, dark, the stainless steel gleaming in the pre-dawn light. She found the coffee maker, a high-end machine, and managed to figure it out. As the rich scent of espresso filled the air, she leaned against the counter, closing her eyes. "You're up early." His voice, quiet in the stillness, made her jump. He was standing in the other doorway, the one that led to the garden. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing soft, gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt that stretched across his broad chest. His feet were bare. His hair was messy from sleep. He looked younger and infinitely more dangerous. I couldn't sleep," she said, her hand clutching her coffee mug. "I hope this was okay." "It's fine," he said. He was holding a phone, his expression tight. He'd clearly been on a call. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He looked at her, his gaze sharp, assessing. "Go back to bed, Lena." "You were on a call," she said, pressing, not knowing why. It sounded bad. "It's my business. It has nothing to do with you." "Doesn't it?" she asked, her voice small. "Those men who followed me. Was that your business, too?" His jaw clenched. "They were from a rival crew. A message. They knew I'd been visiting you." Lena's blood ran cold. "A message? What kind of message?" "They were going to hurt you," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "To show me I was weak, that I had something to lose." She set the mug down, her hand shaking. "So, I'm a target, just by being near you, by you eating my soup. That's all it takes." "Yes." The simple, honest answer was worse than a lie. She wasn't safe here. She was the epicenter of the danger. She was the reason for it. "And the call you were just on?" She pushed, her fear making her bold. "Was that about your business, too?" He stared at her, a long, hard look. "I was telling them that if they or anyone ever breathes in the direction of his girl again, I will burn their entire family line to the ground." His girl. The words hung in the air, possessive, terrifying, and final. She was his, and because she was his, she was in mortal danger. "Oh, God," she whispered, sinking onto one of the kitchen stools. She put her head in her hands. This was not a rescue. This was a different kind of trap. She was property to be fought over. Silvano crossed the kitchen in 2 strides. He stood in front of her. She expected him to be angry, to yell at her for eavesdropping. Instead, he did something that shattered her resolve. He knelt. He knelt on the cold tile floor in front of her stool, putting himself below her. He gently pulled her hands away from her face. His own were warm. "Look at me," he commanded, but his voice was a low plea. She looked down at him. The most powerful, feared man in Moraville was kneeling at her feet. "I told you I'm not good at this," he whispered, his thumbs brushing the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I don't know how to keep you safe without this, without being this." He leaned his forehead against her stomach, his hair brushing her silk pajama shirt. She could feel his warm breath through the fabric. His eyes were closed, his face tight with a pain that looked almost physical. It was a gesture of complete, shocking vulnerability. It was a surrender. "I don't want you scared of me, Lena," he murmured, his voice muffled against her. "I swear to God, that's the last thing I want." He stayed there for a long moment. This powerful man, resting his head against her as if she were his only anchor in a storm. Then he lifted his head, his dark, tormented eyes meeting hers. "But I will burn the world for you. I will tear this city apart with my bare hands before I let anyone, lay a finger on you again. I need you to understand that." He wasn't asking her. He was telling her. It was a vow. It was a promise of protection, and it was a threat of utter annihilation. Lena sat there, her fingers trembling in his, her heart breaking for this broken, violent man, and terrified of the love he was offering. His vow hung in the kitchen, heavier and more binding than any chain. "I will burn the world for you." Lena spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended reality. She lived in the guest suite, which was larger and more luxurious than any place she had ever known. Sophia, the sharp-eyed cook, showed her the magnificent kitchen, and Lena found a strange solace there. Chopping vegetables, simmering stocks, it was the only thing that felt normal. She and Sophia formed a quiet, respectful bond, speaking the shared language of food, but outside the kitchen, nothing was normal. Silvano was a ghost. He was in the house. She knew it. She could feel his presence, but he was consumed by his business. She would hear the low murmur of his voice from behind the heavy, closed doors of his study. She would see his men, Matteo and the others, moving with a new, quiet urgency. He was keeping his distance, giving her space, but the tension in the mansion was a low, electric hum. She was safe, but she was a prisoner. She had a new silk robe, but her old, worn-out jeans and her grandmother's locket were still in her apartment. She couldn't wear someone else's clothes forever. She was living in a borrowed life. On the third morning, she found him in the dining room, staring at a cup of coffee. He looked exhausted. The fine lines around his eyes were deeper. "I need to go back to my apartment," she said, her voice firm, pulling him from his thoughts. He looked up, his focus sharpening on her. "No, it's not safe. I need my things. Silvano, my locket, my grandmother's pictures. I can't just leave my whole life there. I'm not one of your suits you can just replace." He studied her, seeing the desperation in her eyes. It wasn't just about clothes. It was about her identity. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "You're right. I'm sorry. I haven't been present." He stood up. "All right, we'll go now. I'll take you." "You?" she asked, surprised. "Won't that draw attention?" "Anyone who matters already knows," he said, his voice grim. "They know you're with me. Hiding you won't change it, but you won't go in alone. Matteo and Franco will go in with you. I'll wait in the car. We'll be in and out in 10 minutes. The drive back to her neighborhood was a jarring re-entry. The polished silence of Silvano's sedan felt alien as it navigated the cracked pavement and graffiti-lined streets. His car was a spaceship, and she was an alien, returning to a world that no longer felt like hers. He pulled up in front of her building. 2 other black cars, his ever-present shadows, parked behind them, blocking the street. Men got out, fanning out silently, their dark suits a stark, menacing contrast to the neighborhood's morning bustle. People on the sidewalk stopped, stared, and hurried on. 10 minutes, Silvano said. Matteo and Franco, 2 of his largest men, flanked her. Matteo used a key to open the front door of the building, not the one she had given him, one she'd never seen, a master key. It sent a chill through her. How long had they had access to her building? They walked up the 3 flights of stairs, their heavy footsteps echoing in the musty hall. She reached her door. Number 3B. The door was already open. It was splintered, hanging crookedly on one hinge, the wood around the lock shattered. "No," Lena whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Stay behind us," Matteo said, his voice a low growl. He and Franco drew their weapons in a single, fluid motion that spoke of endless practice. They pushed the door open the rest of the way and entered. Fanning out, Lena followed, her feet frozen. "Clear," Franco called from the bedroom. "Kitchen's clear," Matteo said. He holstered his weapon and looked at her, his face grim. "Ma'am, I think you should wait outside." But Lena was already pushing past him. Her apartment, her small, cramped, safe in its own way sanctuary, was destroyed. It wasn't a robbery, it was a violation. They hadn't stolen her cheap television. They had slashed her sofa, the cushions vomiting stuffing onto the floor. They had overturned her bookshelf, her few precious books torn and scattered. In her bedroom, her mattress was cut open, her clothes pulled from her drawers and thrown, some smeared with something. Ketchup? Wine? She didn't want to know, but the worst was the kitchen. It was the heart of her home, and they had ripped it out. Flour, sugar, and salt were dumped on the floor, creating a gritty, white sludge. Eggs had been smashed against the wall. Her spice rack was shattered, and there, In the middle of the floor was her soup pot, her grandmother's pot, the one she'd used at Sal's corner, the one she'd carried back and forth. It was dented, as if someone had taken a hammer to it, and a large, jagged hole was punched through the bottom. It was useless. It was garbage. This was the message. Not just that they could get to her, that they could destroy the one thing that defined her. They had destroyed her soup. She made a small, choked sound and slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She stared at the pot, the symbol of her one small pride. Now just a piece of ruined metal. The men who had followed her, the rival crew, they hadn't just been sending a message to Silvano. They were sending one to her. "Lena," Matteo's voice was gentle. "We have to go." "My locket," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My grandmother's picture." She scrambled to her feet and ran to the bedroom, to the small, cheap jewelry box on her dresser. It was overturned, but the locket was still there, tangled in a cheap chain. They hadn't wanted it. It wasn't worth anything. She grabbed it, and the framed photo of her and her grandmother from the nightstand. She looked around at the wreckage, at the violation. There was nothing else here to save. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a tomb. She walked out, past the two guards, down the stairs and into the street, clutching the photo and the locket. Silvano was out of the car before she reached the curb. He saw her face, saw the tears streaming down her cheeks, and his own went rigid with a cold, contained fury. "What did they do?" he said. It was not a question. Everything," she choked out. "My pot? They broke my soup pot." It sounded so stupid, so trivial. But he understood. His eyes, which had been fixed on her face, flicked up to the building, and the look in them was terrifying. It was the look of a man making a calculation, a promise of retribution so cold it was absolute. "Get her in the car," he said to Matteo. Lena grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the expensive wool of his suit. "No, Silvano, no, please. They will pay for this," he said, his voice lethally calm. "They put their hands on what is mine." "And then what?" she cried, her voice rising, hysterical. "They hit back, and then you hit back, and it never, ever stops, does it? They broke my things. Silvano, they're just things. Please, don't do this. Not for me, not for a pot." She was begging him not to be the man he was. He looked at her, his jaw working. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, a terror not of the men who trashed her apartment, but of him, of what he was about to do. The muscle in his jaw clenched, relaxed, and clenched again. He was at war with himself. "For now," he said. The words ripped from his throat. "For you, for now. We go." He bundled her into the car, and the convoy pulled away, leaving her old life shattered and broken behind that night. She sat on the silk armchair in her guest suite, staring at the locket in her palm. She hadn't spoken since they'd returned. Sophia had brought her a tray of food, but it sat untouched. There was a soft knock. Silvano entered without waiting for an answer. He wasn't in his suit. He was in a soft, dark sweater and trousers. He looked domestic. It was a lie, but it was a comforting one. He didn't speak. He just walked over to the fireplace, knelt and skillfully built a fire. He lit it, and the room was filled with the soft crackle of burning wood and the scent of pine. He sat on the floor, his back against the foot of the bed, looking at the flames. He didn't crowd her. He just existed. "They're just things," Lena whispered to the fire. "So why do I feel like they carved me up, too?" "Because it wasn't about the things," Silvano said, his voice a low rumble. "It was about making you feel small, making you feel helpless. It's about power." She looked at him, at his broad back, at the way the firelight caught the dark waves of his hair. "I know about that, feeling helpless." He turned his head, his dark eyes finding hers. He waited. It was the fire, or his quiet presence, or the absolute violation of the day. But the walls inside her, the ones she'd kept up for years, began to crumble. "I had a boyfriend before," she said, her voice quiet. "Before I came to Moraville, his name was Rich. I thought he was charming." She gave a small, bitter laugh. He was a small-time dealer. He dealt just enough to feel like a big shot, and just enough to be stupid. He said he loved me. I was 19. I believed him. She traced the carving on the arm of the chair. He got into trouble. He owed the wrong people money, a lot of money. So one night, he cleaned out our apartment, took my savings, which wasn't much, but it was everything I had, took my car, even took the rent money I'd left on the table, and he left me. Just left me to deal with the landlord and the men who came looking for him. He used me as a shield and then threw me away. She finally looked at Silvano. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but his attention total. I ran, I grabbed a bag and got on a bus. I ended up here. I've been running ever since, keeping my head down, trying to be invisible, because every man I've ever known just takes, like Grabowski, like Rich. They take until there's nothing left. She was crying now, silent, hot tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. And today felt just like that, like they were reminding me that I'm nothing, that they can take whatever they want. Silvano stood up. He walked over to her chair and knelt in front of her, just as he had in the kitchen. He took her hands. His were warm, calloused. He didn't say, "I'm not like them." He didn't make promises. He just held her hands, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, back and forth, a steady, comforting, physical presence. He waited until her tears subsided. "You deserve better than all of us," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't place. "Better than him. Better than me." "Then why are you here?" she whispered. "Because," he said, his gaze intense. "I'm the only one who can keep you safe from men like us." He leaned in, his eyes searching hers, asking a question. She didn't pull away. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her tear-stained cheek. His lips were soft, respectful. "You're not nothing, Lena," he murmured against her skin. "You're everything." And then he kissed her mouth. This kiss was not the desperate, claiming heat of the alley. It was slow. It was deep. It was a question, an answer, and a promise, all in one. It was emotionally charged, a deliberate, conscious act. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her jawline as his lips moved on hers. He tasted of the fire's smoke and a faint, clean scent that was just him. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, and her hands, which had been clutching the locket, opened. The locket fell to the floor, forgotten. She brought her hands up, her fingers tangling in his thick hair, pulling him closer. It was a surrender. She was letting go. She was tired of fighting, tired of being alone. He felt the change in her, the small sigh of capitulation, and his other arm went around her waist. He lifted her from the chair as easily as if she weighed nothing. Rising to his feet and carrying her the few steps to the bed, he laid her down, following her, his body half covering hers, his weight supported on his elbows. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with a powerful, controlled passion. He was giving her every chance to stop, to say no. She met his gaze, her own fear finally eclipsed by a different, deeper need, the need to be touched, the need to be held by someone who, in his own violent way, saw her. "Silvano?" she whispered, her voice a plea. It was all the answer he needed. He lowered his head, his mouth finding the sensitive skin of her neck, his lips tracing a hot path to her collarbone. She arched into him, a small sound escaping her. Every touch was careful, almost reverent. He was a man used to taking, but with her, he was asking. His hands moved over her, learning the shape of her through the silk pajamas. There was no fumbling, no frantic hurry. It was a slow, deliberate exploration. He undid the buttons of her pajama top, his fingers brushing her skin, and his breath hitched. He kissed the valley between her breasts, his touch gentle, his lips warm. It wasn't the act of a brute. It was worship. He was unmaking her, and she was letting him. She, in turn, pulled at his sweater, needing to feel his skin. He helped her, pulling it over his head, revealing a chest that was hard, scarred, and real. She laid her palms flat against him, feeling the heat of him, the steady, heavy beat of his heart under her hands. Their bodies moved together, a slow, aching rhythm of discovery. It was passionate, but the passion was rooted in the emotional wreckage of the day. In the confessions and the comfort, it was a claiming. But this time, it was mutual. Every touch carried weight. Every kiss was a vow. He was careful, so careful, as if he knew she was fragile, as if he was terrified of breaking this one good thing. And as he finally made them one, she let go. Not in fear, but in release, finding a sanctuary in the very arms of the man who was the source of all the danger. Later, they lay tangled in the sheets, the fire burning low, the room cast in shadow. Lena was pressed against his side, her head on his chest, her hand resting over his heart. His arm was a heavy, protective weight around her. She felt quiet. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, weary calm. "Silvano?" she murmured into his skin. Am I just comfort food to you? Like the soup? Something to make you feel better?" He was silent for a moment. He shifted, pulling her closer, his hand coming up to stroke her hair. He kissed the top of her head. "No, Lena," he said, his voice a deep, sure rumble in his chest. "You're not the soup." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze in the dim light. His eyes were clear, serious, all passion spent, leaving only a raw, unguarded truth. "You're home." The next morning, Lena woke up alone in the massive bed. The fire was embers, and the scent of him was on the pillow next to her. She felt a strange, light-headed sense of peace, a feeling so unfamiliar it was almost alarming. She dressed in the new clothes Sophia had left for her, simple, soft jeans and a cashmere sweater that felt sinfully luxurious. She went down to the kitchen, expecting to find Sophia, but instead, Matteo was there. Drinking coffee, he stood when she entered, his demeanor as respectful as ever, but there was a new tension in his shoulders. "Morning, ma'am. Matteo, is Silvano? The boss is in his study. He's busy." An ice-cold premonition trickled down Lena's spine. "Busy? What's wrong?" Matteo looked uncomfortable. He glanced away at the morning news playing softly on a small television in the corner. There was an incident last night at the old packing district. Lena's eyes snapped to the screen. A local news reporter was standing in front of a building, surrounded by police tape. The headline read, "Gang violence erupts in Moraville." "Details are scarce," the reporter was saying, "but sources tell us a warehouse known to be a stronghold of the Scorpions gang was compromised. Police are not commenting on casualties, but sources say the gang has been effectively dismantled, silenced. Lena's blood turned to ice. The Scorpions, the gang that had followed her, the gang that had trashed her apartment. For now, he had said, he had waited. He had waited until she had cried in his arms, until she had opened up to him, until she had given herself to him. And then, under the cover of darkness, while she slept in his bed, he had broken his promise. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Matteo just nodded toward the hall. She didn't run. She walked. She walked down the hall to the heavy oak doors of his study. She didn't knock. She threw them open. He was behind his desk, a phone to his ear. He saw her, and his face, which had been a mask of stone, softened for just a fraction of a second. He said something low into the phone and hung up, placing it carefully on the desk. "Lena, you promised me," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, quiet rage. "You looked me in the eye, and you promised me you wouldn't." He didn't lie. He didn't evade. He stood up and faced her, his hands clasped behind his back. "I promised I wouldn't. For now. For you. But for now is over." "While I was sleeping," she cried, the betrayal stinging more than the violence, "you held me. You let me. And then you went out and did that? They would have done worse next time," he said, his voice calm, rational. It was the calmness that was the most terrifying. This was not passion. This was business. They would have found a way to get to you, at the diner, on the street. They showed their hand. They had to be removed. Removed, silenced. Is that what you call it? How many? Oh, God. Silvano, I won't wait for them to hurt you, he said, walking around the desk toward her. I will not sit and wait for the next message to be delivered. That is not how I survive. It is not how I keep you safe. This isn't safety, she yelled, backing away from him. This is a war, and you've put me in the middle of it. You used my pain as an excuse. I used it as a reason, he shot back, his own voice finally rising, the control cracking. To do what I should have done the moment they put their hands on you, to end the threat. I begged you not to, and I listened, and in return, they broke into your home and shattered your life. I will not make that mistake again. He reached for her. Lena, come here. She flinched, slapping his hand away. Don't touch me. His face hardened, the vulnerability from the night before gone, replaced by the boss. Lena stared at him, at the man who had called her home, at the man who had just ordered the removal of an entire gang, the love she felt, the fear she felt, the gratitude she felt. It all churned inside her, a toxic, confusing storm. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't be in this room, in this house. With a choked sob, she turned and ran. She ran out of the study, past a stone-faced Mateo in the hall, grabbed her old, thin jacket from the entryway, and stormed out the massive front door, into the cold, uncaring light of day. Lena ran. She ran from the heavy oak door, across the ancient cobblestones, and down the long, winding drive. She didn't look back. She expected a hand on her shoulder, the sound of his men stopping her, the rumble of a car engine. Nothing. She reached the massive iron gates. The uniformed guard in the booth looked at her, confused, but he didn't move to stop her. She hit the button for pedestrian access. It buzzed, and a smaller gate beside the large one clicked open. He was letting her go. She stumbled out onto the wealthy, tree-lined street, a ghost in a cashmere sweater that wasn't hers. She ran until her lungs burned, until the stitch in her side was a searing knife. She ran until the mansions gave way to smaller houses, and then to storefronts, and then to the familiar, gritty streets of her own neighborhood. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment was a tomb, a violation. She had her handbag, her locket, the photo of her grandmother, and about $40 in cash. She ended up at a motel off the highway, a place with a flickering neon sign and rooms that smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. She paid for 2 nights. For 3 days, she lived in a state of numb, hollow shock. She kept the television on, the volume low, just for the noise. Her phone, which she'd recharged with the lamp by the bed, buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. An hour later, and again she knew it was him. She stared at the screen, her heart a cold stone in her chest, and pressed the button to decline the call. She refused 6 calls in 3 days. She was alone, utterly. The safety net, as violent and terrifying as it had been, was gone, and she had been the one to cut it. On the 4th day, her money was almost gone. She was hungry. She had to work. She couldn't stay in this motel room, cowering. She had to go back. Walking into Sal's corner was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She pushed open the glass door at 4 p.m. Maria was at the counter, rolling silverware. She looked up, and her face went white, as if she'd seen a ghost. Lena. Oh, my God. We thought. Thought what? Lena asked, her voice raspy. Sal, get out here, Maria yelled. Sal burst out of the office, his checkbook in his hand. He stopped dead when he saw her. Lena, you're here. We heard there was a thing at your apartment. I know, Lena said, her voice flat. I need my job back, Sal. I need my shift. Sal and Maria exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Listen, kid, Sal said, pulling at his collar. You're a great girl. Your soup is the best. But you can't work here. Not now. Why not? Are you crazy? He hissed, his voice dropping. He's been here. Costa, he came in the day you left. He didn't yell. He just sat in the booth for an hour. Didn't order, just sat. It was terrifying. He asked where you were. I told him I didn't know. I don't think he believed me. He let me go. Lena said. "It's over. I'm not with him. I need to work. Sal, please, I have nowhere else." Sal looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the desperate set of her jaw. He was a decent man, caught between a rock and a hard place. He was terrified of the men who had threatened her, and he was more terrified of the man who had protected her. "One shift," he said, sighing, defeat settling on his shoulders. "You work tonight, but if he comes, if anyone comes—" "Lena, I got a family." "I understand," she said. "Thank you." She went into the kitchen. Her old apron was still hanging on the hook. She tied it around her waist. The familiar weight was comforting, but it was a lie. Nothing was the same. She started chopping onions for the evening soup, her hands moving on autopilot. But the rhythm didn't calm her. Every jingle of the bell on the front door made her flinch, her knife pausing over the cutting board. She was trying to rebuild normalcy, but normalcy was a house that had already burned down. She was just a ghost, haunting the wreckage. The shift was quiet, tense. Maria avoided her. The other customers, the regulars, seemed to sense the cloud of fear hanging over the diner and ate quickly, leaving small tips. By 10 o'clock, the place was empty. Maria was wiping down the booths, her back to Lena. Sal was in his office, pointedly counting receipts with the door half closed. Lena was scrubbing the large stock pot, the replacement Sal had bought. It was cheap, aluminum, and the soup had scorched on the bottom. As she scraped at the burn-on vegetables, she saw it. A plain white envelope, slid under the alley door. It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. Her heart stopped. She dried her hands on her apron and walked over, her feet feeling like lead. She bent down and picked it up. It was thin. Her name, Lena, was written on the front in a crude, blocky scrawl. She tore it open, her fingers trembling. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. 5 words, also in block letters. "You think he can protect you forever?" Lena's blood ran cold. She stumbled back, hitting the steel counter. She hadn't just run from Silvano. She had run from his protection, and his enemies, the ones who were left, the ones who had been watching. They knew. Before. She was Silvano Costa's girl, locked in his mansion, untouchable. Now, she was the girl who had run away. She was the girl who was back working at a diner, exposed, alone, a perfect, easy target, a message waiting to be sent. She wasn't just unprotected. She was a liability. She was more exposed now than she had ever been in her life. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath. She spent another night at the motel, the chair wedged under the door handle. Her grandmother's locket clutched in her fist. She didn't sleep. The threatening note sat on the nightstand, mocking her. She had a choice. Call him. Or run again, but she was so tired of running. She went back to work the next day. It was the only place she had. It was an act of defiance, or maybe just desperation. She worked the lunch shift in a fog of terror. Every customer who walked in was a potential threat. Every car that slowed down on the street outside was a harbinger of doom. He came in at 1:30, in the middle of the lunch rush. Not Silvano. This man was wiry, his skin sallow. He wore a stained hoodie, and his eyes were jittery, darting around the diner with a frantic, desperate energy. A small, ugly tattoo of a scorpion was visible on his neck, just above the collar. He didn't go to a table. He walked right past Maria, who was holding a tray of burgers. He walked straight to the pass-through window, where Lena was ladling soup. "You," he snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Lena froze, the ladle hovering over a bowl. "You're his girl, huh? The one he burned the world for?" His eyes were filled with a wild, unfocused grief and rage. I don't know what you're talking about," Lena said, backing away from the window. "Liar," he spat. He reached through the pass-through, a violation of her space, but he couldn't reach her. He stormed around the counter, pushing past a startled busboy, and entered her kitchen. "Get out!" Lena yelled, holding the heavy ladle up like a weapon. "Sal, he messed up my family," the man whispered, advancing on her. He was shaking. "He took my brother. He took everything, all for you." He lunged and grabbed her arm. his fingers digging into her bicep like claws. "You're coming with me. You're going to be the message. He's going to find out what it feels like to lose." The bell on the front door jingled. The entire diner, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, the low hum of conversation, everything stopped. It wasn't just a pause. It was a vacuum. The air pressure in the room dropped, becoming heavy and cold. Lena looked past the man's shoulder. Silvano was standing just inside the doorway. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing the dark jeans and Henley he'd worn that day in the diner, as if he'd just thrown on the first things he could find. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was a mask of cold, exhausted fury, his eyes flat, dead, and fixed on the man's hand on Lena's arm. His two guards, Matteo and Franco, flanked him, but they stayed by the door. This was not their business. "You—" The man holding Lena stammered, his grip tightening in panic. He shoved Lena in front of him, pulling her back against his chest. "You stay back. Costa, I swear to God, I'll gut her." He pulled a small, dirty knife from his pocket and pressed the flat of the blade against her side. Lena whimpered, her body rigid with terror. Silvano didn't stop. He didn't rush. He just walked. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, weaving between the tables. He didn't look at the man's face. He didn't look at the knife. His gaze was locked on the pale, grimy fingers digging into Lena's arm. "Let her go," he said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, calm command, devoid of any emotion, and it was the most terrifying sound Lena had ever heard. "I'll do it," the man shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'll kill her. Stay back." Silvano stopped, just 3 feet away, close enough for the man to strike, close enough to show he had no fear of the knife. "You think so?" Silvano asked, his voice conversational. "You think you're faster than me? You think you can cut her and still be standing a second later?" The man was sweating, his eyes wide, darting from Silvano to the exits. He was trapped. He had made a fatal, stupid miscalculation. Silvano took one more, slow step. He leaned in, his body language relaxed, as if he were discussing the weather. He was so close now, his mouth just inches from the man's ear. The entire diner held its breath. Lena could hear Silvano's whisper, a vibration against her own skin. "I silenced your brothers," he murmured, his voice gentle. "I did that when I was angry. I was in a hurry. If you don't take your hand off her, and your knife, and walk out that door right now, you will find out what I am capable of when I am calm. You have 3 seconds. He didn't count. He just waited. 1. The man's breath hitched. 2. The knife clattered to the floor. 3. His hand flew off Lena's arm as if her skin had turned to acid. He stumbled back, pushing himself away, his face a mask of abject terror. I'm sorry, he whimpered. "Go," Silvano said. The man ran. He scrambled, crab-walked backward, fell over a chair, and then fled the diner, sprinting down the street until he was gone. The diner was silent. Maria was hiding behind the coffee machine. Sal was frozen, peeking out of his office. Lena was shaking so violently her knees buckled. Silvano caught her. His hands were on her arms, holding her steady. He was warm, solid, and real. He looked at her, his eyes no longer flat and dead, but filled with a terrible, aching exhaustion and a raw, possessive frustration. He didn't yell. He didn't ask if she was okay. "Are you done pushing me away now?" he asked, his voice rough. He didn't wait for an answer. He took her by the elbow, his grip firm but not painful, and steered her out of the kitchen. He didn't lead her to the front door, but to the side door, the one in the alley, the one where he had first kissed her. He pushed the door open, and the cold afternoon air hit them. He led her past the dumpsters, to the brick wall that smelled of old tomatoes. He let go of her arm and scrubbed his hands over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. "You ran," he said, his back to her. "You lied," she shot back, her voice trembling, her fear finally giving way to the rage and betrayal. "You said for now, and then you murdered them." "While I slept in your bed!" He spun around, his control finally snapping. And look what just happened, he roared, his voice bouncing off the narrow brick walls. Did I lie about that? Did I lie that they would come back? They are animals. Lena, they don't send letters. They send knives. This is the world. This is my world. And it is the world you are in, whether you are in my house or not. So this is it? She cried, tears of frustration streaming down her face. This is my life, hiding in your mansion or cowering in a diner. I have no choice. I gave you a choice. I let you walk out that gate. And where did it get you? To a motel? With a chair under the door? To this? With a knife at your ribs? Is that the life you want? Is that freedom? I'm scared, she finally screamed. The admission torn from her throat, his anger deflated instantly, replaced by that deep, weary sadness. He didn't hurt you, he said, his voice dropping. I got here. No, she said, wiping her face. You don't... I'm not scared of you, Silvano. Not really. She looked at him, at this violent, broken man who had just saved her life. Again. I'm scared of this. I'm scared of what loving you costs. I'm scared of the blood. I'm scared of loving a man who can silence a dozen people and then kiss my forehead. Her voice broke. I'm scared that I wanted you to... I'm scared that when I saw that note, I was angry you weren't there. I'm scared of what I'm becoming. He stepped closer, his expression softening, the boss receding, leaving the man. I can't change what I am, Lena, he said, his voice low and raw. I can't make this world pretty. I can only stop it from touching you. By locking me up, she whispered, the accusation weak. By protecting you, he corrected. I told you. No control, no cages. That's what you said, and you ran. You lied to me. Silvano. I didn't know how to tell you, he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice stunned her. I didn't know how to say, I'm going to kill men for you and have you. Still look at me. I'm looking at you now, she said. He searched her face, seeing the fear, but also the strength, the anger, the forgiveness. If you want to work here, he said, his voice rough, I will have 10 men on this block. Sal will hate it, but you will be safe. If you want to cook in my kitchen, you will be safe, but you are not walking alone again. Ever. I am promising you protection. I am promising you. Soup. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And someone to come home to. That's all I have. Lena, it's violent and it's ugly, and it's covered in blood, but it's yours. If you want it. She looked at him. This man who was a walking contradiction, a murderer with the eyes of a lost boy. She thought of the cold, lonely motel room. She thought of the man's knife at her side. She was tired of being cold. She was tired of being alone. She was tired of running. Slowly, her hand still trembling, she reached out and took his large, warm hand, the hand that had ordered death and built fires, closed around hers, lacing their fingers together. If I stay, she said, her voice clear and steady in the small, cold alley. I stay all the way. No more running. His shoulders sagged in relief, a breath he seemed to have been holding for days escaping him. But no more lies. Silvano, she continued, her grip tightening on his. No more silences while I sleep. You tell me. You tell me what you are. You tell me what you've done. I'm staying, but I'm staying with my eyes open. He looked at her hand in his, then up to her face. He pulled her. He didn't ask. He pulled her hard against his body, backing her up against the brick wall of the kitchen, the one by the side door, the one where they had shared their first kiss. The wall was cool against her back, and the smell of the afternoon marinara, tomato, and basil was a thick, comforting cloud around them. He framed her face with his free hand, his callous thumb brushing her cheek. Eyes open. He agreed, his voice a low vow, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic hunger of the first time. It was not the slow, reverent exploration of the second. This was a seal. It was a claiming. It was a treaty signed and a surrender accepted. It was firmer, deeper, a kiss that said mine and yours, and finally, it was possession. But it was also sanctuary. It was the kiss of a man who had found the only thing in the world he was terrified of losing, and he was never, ever letting it go. When Lena walked back into the mansion, her hand held firmly in Silvano's, the house felt different. The front door closed behind them with a heavy, final thud. It was not the sound of a cage door locking. It was the sound of a drawbridge being raised. She didn't go back to the guest suite. He led her up the sweeping staircase, past the guest wing, and to a set of heavy, carved doors at the end of the main hall. His room, their room, it was massive, dominated by a bed even larger than the one in the guest suite and a large fireplace. But it was also lived in. A suit jacket was slung over a chair. A heavy-looking watch sat on the nightstand. It was his space. She moved in permanently, but it wasn't a process of boxes and unpacking. It was a slow, quiet integration. Her things, the few she'd salvaged, found places on the dresser. The clothes Sophia had bought were joined by new ones Silvano had ordered. Softer things, clothes for living in, not just for being a guest. And the house, which had felt so large and cold, began to change. Silvano was present. He was still the boss, still a man who disappeared into his study for hours, taking calls that made his voice drop to a cold, flat monotone. But he was no longer a ghost. He took his meals with her, in the grand dining room that Sophia now set for two. After a week, he showed her the new room. He'd taken a solarium on the first floor, a room she hadn't even known existed, and had it converted. It was wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sprawling, wild garden. It wasn't the industrial, stainless steel prison of Sophia's kitchen. This one was warm, with cream-colored cabinets, a massive butcher block island, and a gleaming 8-burner stove, copper pots, a new set, hung from a rack above and outside the windows. His men had built her a small, raised herb garden, already planted with basil, oregano, thyme, and rosemary. It was her kitchen. "It's Silvano," she breathed, her hand going to her mouth. She walked in, running her hand over the cool, smooth marble countertops. "Is it right?" he asked, standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. He looked almost nervous. "Sophia said you liked the gas stove, the windows." "It's perfect," she whispered. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's the most beautiful room I've ever seen." "Good," he said, a small, satisfied nod. "You should have your own space to make soup," she finished, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yeah," he said, his own lips twitching. "To make soup." She didn't abandon Sal's corner, not entirely. Sal, caught between his terror of Silvano and his need for her cooking, had agreed to a new arrangement. Lena still came in twice a week, during the day, to prep the soups for the week. She was never alone. One of Silvano's cars sat outside the entire time, and Franco, the quieter of his main guards, would sit in the corner booth, drinking coffee and reading the paper. The staff, who had been terrified, slowly began to relax. Franco was polite, tipped well, and never looked at anyone. The arrangement was strange. But Moraville was a strange city. But her real cooking happened in her new kitchen. At first, the men were wary. Silvano's guards were a closed, tight-lipped fraternity. They respected her because she was his, but they watched her. One afternoon, Matteo, Silvano's most trusted man, the one with the graying hair and the intelligent eyes, found her kneading bread. He stood in the doorway, just as Silvano had. "Smells good, ma'am." "It's focaccia," she said, not pausing. "You want to learn?" He looked surprised. I'm not a cook, ma'am." "Everyone can be a cook," she said, dusting her hands. "Wash your hands, over there." He hesitated, then did as he was told. For 20 minutes, the most feared enforcer in the Costa family stood beside her, his large, scarred hands awkwardly dimpling the dough with his fingertips, drizzling it with olive oil and rosemary. He was clumsy, but he was careful. It became a ritual. She started making large, simple meals for the household staff, not just Silvano and Sophia, but the guards. She made pots of her grandmother's Sunday soup, rich baked ziti, simmering red sauce. She learned their names: Franco, it turned out, had a sweet tooth and was powerless against her cannoli. Matteo, for all his toughness, loved a simple, well-made minestrone. Even the young ones, the new recruits who guarded the gates, would receive plates from her. She wasn't just the boss's girl anymore. She was Lena. She was the heart of the house. She had formed quiet, unshakable friendships. She had built her own army, not with fear but with garlic and basil. She was, in her own way, as protected by them as she was by Silvano. One evening, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, Silvano found her in her kitchen. She was cleaning up, the scent of simmering tomatoes still heavy in the air. "Put your coat on," he said, his voice quiet. "Why? Are we going out? I have to show you something. Someone." He led her to the car. He drove, just the two of them. Matteo and Franco followed in a separate car, a discreet shadow. He drove out of the city to a quiet, old cemetery on a hill overlooking the water. The gates were locked, but he had a key. He didn't speak as they walked, the gravel crunching under their feet in the twilight. He led her to a simple, elegant headstone of dark gray marble. Isabella Costa, beloved mother, she fed the world. Lena felt her breath catch. This was it, the root of him. Silvano was carrying a small, sealed thermos. He opened it, the steam rising in the cool evening air. It was the soup Lena had made that night, the minestrone. He had brought a plastic bowl and spoon. He poured the soup into the bowl and placed it carefully at the base of the headstone. He stood there for a long time, his hands in the pockets of his dark overcoat. "I come here when it's quiet," he said, his voice rough. "I used to tell her everything, about the business, about the anger. When she died," he paused, his jaw working. "It wasn't... She was shot, in her own restaurant, a rival family, trying to send a message to my father. They killed her for a pot of sauce." "Oh, Silvano," Lena whispered, her hand finding his. "I was 16. I found her. I held her." He squeezed his eyes shut. "That's when I became this. I took all that love I had for her, and I burned it. I turned it into this, into what I am, into rage. It's the only thing that's kept me alive." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes raw in the fading light. "For 10 years, I've been empty, just running on that, on revenge. And then I walked into that diner, and I tasted your soup." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. It was the first time in 10 years I'd felt something else, something other than the anger. It tasted like her. It tasted like home. He gave a small, sad laugh. "I became obsessed with the soup. And then, with the woman who made it, the only other person in the world who understands that food isn't just food." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "She would have liked you. Lena, she would have loved you." Lena's heart ached, a sweet, painful tightening in her chest. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him, this powerful, broken man, in a silent, moonlit cemetery. "I love you, Silvano," she whispered, the words finally coming, easy and true. He held her tighter, his face buried in her hair. "You're the only good thing I have. Lena, the only thing." They stood there until the moon was high, and then, his arm securely around her, they walked back to the car. The ride home was quiet. Silvano drove, his one hand on the wheel, the other holding hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Matteo and Franco followed, a comforting, familiar presence. They were 5 minutes from the house, on a dark, tree-lined road. When it happened, it was fast. A black, heavy-duty truck, its lights off, pulled out from a side street, slamming into the car carrying Matteo and Franco. The sound was a sickening crunch of metal. "Silvano!" Lena screamed. Before he could react, another car, a dark sedan, sped up behind them, ramming their bumper. Silvano wrestled with the wheel, the car spinning on the road. Headlights appeared in front of them. Another car blocking the road. They were boxed in, ambushed. "Get down!" Silvano roared. He unclipped his seatbelt, reaching for the weapon she knew he kept under his seat. The world exploded in a nightmare of light and sound. The windows of their car shattered as bullets rained down. It was a splinter gang. The Scorpions, the ones who were left, the ones who had nothing to lose. Silvano returned fire, pushing Lena's head down. "Stay down!" Glass was everywhere. The noise was deafening. Lena could hear men shouting, the thud, thud, thud of bullets hitting the car. Then she heard a door open. Matteo, his face bloody, was out of his wrecked car. Franco was providing cover fire. A young man, one of the splinter gang, was running toward their car, his gun raised, aiming at Silvano. At the same time, one of Silvano's youngest guards, a kid named Paolo, who she'd taught to make focaccia just last week, ran to intercept him. They were both in the open. Lena saw it happen in slow motion. The gang member turned, surprised, and leveled his gun at Paolo. Paolo froze. Lena didn't think. She reacted. She was out of the car, her body fueled by pure, primal instinct. "Paolo, get down!" She shoved him, hard. She pushed the young bodyguard toward the ground, shielding his body with her own. A white-hot, searing pain shot through her left shoulder. It felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. The force of it knocked her to the pavement. "Lena!" Silvano's voice was not a human sound. It was a roar of pure, elemental fury. A sound of something ancient and terrible being unleashed. The firefight, which had been chaotic, changed. It became an execution. Silvano was out of the car, his weapon firing with a calm, brutal efficiency. Matteo and Franco, seeing Lena on the ground, moved with a similar, cold rage. The ambush, which had been desperate, turned into a massacre. It was over in 30 seconds. Lena was on the ground, her hand pressed to her shoulder. It was wet, so wet. She looked at her hand. It was black with blood in the moonlight. No, 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 no. Silvano was kneeling over her, his hands frantic, pulling her hand away to see the wound. "Lena, look at me. Stay with me. Eyes on me. It hurts. Silvano," she whispered, her vision starting to blur at the edges. "It's a graze," he said, his voice shaking, trying to reassure himself as much as her. "It's just a graze. You're okay. You're okay." He ripped off his own jacket, pressing it to the wound. "Matteo, get the car. Get the goddamn car. Now." He scooped her up, his arms like steel bands, and ran to the one car that was still drivable. He laid her in the back seat, his hands covered in her blood. "Find out who was left," he snarled at Matteo, his voice a low, terrifying command. "Find out who they knew. Find their families. Find their pets. I want them gone. I want them wiped from this earth. I want them erased." He was back in burn the world mode, but this was worse. This was cold. "Silvano?" Lena whispered from the back seat, her voice weak. He got in beside her, his hand pressed to her shoulder. "Don't talk. We're going to the hospital." "No, no more," she murmured, her eyes fluttering. "Please?" She blacked out. When she woke, the world was white and smelled of antiseptic. A steady beeping sound was next to her ear. She was in a private hospital room. Her shoulder was heavily bandaged, a dull, throbbing ache radiating down her arm. He was there, sitting in the chair beside her bed, his head in his hands. He was still in his blood-stained clothes. He hadn't left. "Silvano!" His head snapped up. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face a mask of grief and exhaustion. He looked broken. "Lena, you're awake. The doctor said you're fine. It was a graze. The bullet, it went through. It missed the bone. You're okay." He said the words like a prayer. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. He looked away, his jaw clenching. "Matteo is handling it. Call him." "Lena, not now." "Call him. Silvano," she insisted, her voice surprisingly strong. "Call him, now, or I walk out of here, bandages and all." He stared at her. A long, conflicted moment. He saw the steel in her eyes, the iron, the strength he had fallen in love with. He pulled out his phone. He hit a number. "Matteo, where are you?" A pause. Silvano's eyes closed. "Good. Hold them. Wait for my command." "No, I don't care what they did." "You wait." He hung up. He looked at her. "They have them," he said. "The last 3. They're in a warehouse. Let them go, she whispered. His eyes snapped open. What? Lena, they shot you. They tried to kill us. They tried to kill you. And you won. You always win, she said. Her hand, her good one, reaching for his. He took it, his grip desperate. But I don't want to win like this. I don't want our home to be built on a pile of bodies. You told me my soup tasted like something good, like your mother. This isn't good. This is just blood. It's just anger. It's what you've been living on for 10 years, but you don't have to anymore. Lena, please, Silvano, for me, don't let this be what defines us. Let them go. Let the anger go. Come home, with me. He looked at their joined hands, her pale, small hand in his, which was still stained dark with her blood. He thought of his mother's grave. He thought of the endless, empty years of rage, and he looked at her, the woman who had shoved a young man out of the way of a bullet, the woman who had more strength in her wounded body than his entire army. They'll come back, he whispered, his voice full of anguish. And you'll stop them, she said, but not like this. He stared at her, his internal war raging in his eyes. He bent his head, his forehead resting on their joined hands. He took a long, shuddering breath. He was letting 10 years of rage go. Okay, he whispered. Okay, for you. He picked up the phone. Matteo, let them go. Put them on a bus. Tell them if I ever see their faces in this city again, Lena won't be here to save them. Then, come home. He hung up. He looked at her, his eyes clear for the first time. The storm was gone. There's a condition, he said, his voice firm. What? I'll do it your way. I'll try. But you never leave my side again. You don't walk out of that house. You don't walk out of this room. You are with me, always. That's the only way I can. I can keep you safe. That's the only way I can do this. It was a cage, but it was a cage for two. Okay, Silvano, she whispered, her fingers tightening on his. Okay, I'll stay. 3 weeks later, the bandages were gone, leaving a raw, red scar on her shoulder. Lena was standing in her kitchen, the sunny one, stirring a large pot. The scent of minestrone, of tomatoes and basil and home, filled the room. The house was quiet. It was a new kind of quiet, not the tense, watchful silence of before, but a real, settled peace. She heard his footsteps, but she didn't turn. His arms wrapped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her good shoulder. He pulled her back against his chest, holding her, his body a solid, warm wall. You're not supposed to be lifting, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. It's just soup. Silvano, I'm fine. He kissed her neck, just below her ear, a soft, warm press of his lips. I was worried today. I was fine. Franco was with me. She'd gone to Sal's, just for an hour, just to prove she could. He held her tighter, his eyes closing, just breathing her in, the scent of her, and the soup. This soup's perfect, he whispered, his lips moving against her skin. Just like you. Lena smiled, leaning her head back against his chest. She looked out the window, at her herb garden, at the peaceful, sunlit world he had built for her, and she had built for him. Still want me to stay? She asked, her voice soft. He held her tighter, his arms locking around her, his answer a fierce, possessive, and infinitely loving promise. Every damn day. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Lena and Silvano. If you did, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what part of the world you are listening from and what you thought of the story in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories. For more in the future, we appreciate your support more than you know.